I almost forgot, but John O'Elderson, our very own SEO genius, of course, is also here with us today. We have a very special task for him. So that's going to be fun. Let's start by exploring a little background on structured data. Jason will talk us through that. Then we'll have a roundtable discussion, and after that, we'll finish up with Q&A, answering any questions that you might have. If you do, just comment on the live stream, and we will answer as many questions as we can. So before we dive into any discussions, let's go over to Jason for a short presentation.
Thank you very much, Yoast the host. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm going to be talking about structured data. And I know that structured data as a phrase, as a concept, can be a little bit scary. So I've called it blocks and schema, which is kind of easier, kind of cooler. Blocks is a really nice, easy term to come to terms with. Schema, maybe you don't know what it is, but we're about to find out. So, why is structured data important? What is it? What can we do with it? Where are we going with it? Why does Google want it so much? The World Wide Web is the biggest database we have ever created. It's got a phenomenal amount of knowledge in it. Human beings have written and recorded and put enormous amounts of human knowledge into the World Wide Web. But it's a disorganized mess because all these people have put it in their own specific, particular little manner. We all function very differently in our brains. It's disorganized, it's a mess. You might think you're organized. You're not organized in the same way as the person who's running the site next to you, and so on and so forth and so forth. So it's disorganized, and Google has a lot of problems with that. And we can see Google's robot here is looking really unhappy. Google wants to organize it. And that seems like a really easy thing to do. You immediately think, yeah, okay, all this data, put it in, organize it, simple, because it's all HTML. We have a system. But HTML and the way information is presented to Google, it differs across the entire web. And to extract understanding from it, and this is what Google looks at as understanding. It's its knowledge graph. And if you look at this, you can see Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa, born in Italy. We all understand that naturally. As human beings, that makes so much sense to us. But for a machine, that isn't obvious. And that's what it's trying to do, is build an understanding of the knowledge it finds on the web, which is incredibly disorganized, so that it can figure out what it's talking about and what solutions it can provide to its users. And structure helps Google create this knowledge graph, this understanding of the knowledge from the very, 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 very disorganized web. What is structured data? Big question. And it's the one we're going to look at today. And structured data, I think it sounds kind of scary, but in fact, it just means organized and labeled and clear. So, blocks and structured data. Blocks is my favorite #1 top topic. And it was Jono who first said to me. About a year ago, he said, let's think in blocks. What's a website? It's a block within the World Wide Web. Within that block, which is a website, we have categories. Within the categories, we have blocks, which are pages. We've come down already 3 levels, and we're still looking at blocks within blocks within blocks, and it goes further. Within a page, Semantic HTML5 allows us to create blocks. We have the header block, the aside block, the footer block, and the article block. And that is part of WordPress. It's often part of the themes. From what I understand, breaking news, it's coming to WordPress core, which is brilliant stuff. Within the article, we already have this H1 main topic, H2 subtopic with a paragraph that goes with it. It's an implicit block. And Google can understand that that H2 goes with the paragraph that's just underneath it. The next H2 goes with the paragraph that's just underneath that. The H3 relates to the paragraph and the H2 above it with its own little paragraph. And Google can identify each one of those as a block with a topic or a subtopic or a subtopic. So we have this situation with Gutenberg, where we're suddenly being forced to think in blocks. If you've been using Gutenberg, you will know that it forces you to have a heading and a paragraph and a block and a block and a block and a block and a block. And some people don't like that. Google loves it. Google's really, really, really keen on it because it can identify what block it needs to understand and the theme of that block within its parent block and its parent block and its parent block. So we end up with this situation. Here's a really nice little diagram of an article with a header, an H1, the H2, the paragraphs, the figures being images or videos. And you can see that it's very well organized and it's very easy to understand which piece of content goes with which heading within which part. Schema. If you don't know what schema is, we're about to find out. Here is the site. Go and look at that site, read it through, and there's phenomenal amounts of things on that site. You can say almost anything using schema. What is schema? It's Google's natural maternal language. It's the language that Google can digest most easily. If you can say it in Google, Google can understand it. And what you're saying with schema is simply confirming what is already in the page, both confirming to Google that it's correctly understood, but also giving it confidence it's understood and the more granular information that you can give through schema. And what I really like about this is we can come back to blocks again. Schema allows you to label the block of a website. So we end up looking at schema in this particular context as labeling of the blocks. You have the website block, and you have a collection, category block. You can label that block so it becomes clear not only that it is a block, but what role it plays within the scheme of the entire block system. Pages, web page, you can label those as blocks too. And you can label the specific role of any given web page from about, checkout, collection, contact, FAQ, we'll come back to that, item page, medical web page, profile page, QA page, search results page. So you can label actually quite explicitly what role any individual page plays, which helps Google to understand under what circumstances, in what context it would want to present that to its users. And here we have Yoast, who suddenly comes into its own because Yoast within Gutenberg, which already organizes everything into blocks, is adding schema as blocks. And that's brilliant. I had a quick play with it the other day, specifically for this. How can I easily implement schema.org structured data in WordPress? Question. Answer, Yoast has introduced some Gutenberg blocks to make adding schema, structured data, simple. Hopefully they will extend and expand the capabilities of this Gutenberg implementation. I really hope they do, because it's brilliant. That took me 10 minutes. And that was because I was having a cup of tea at the same time. And it gives that. If I had written that by hand, my answer, and all the other information related to that, it would have taken me, let's say, 2 hours. Big time saver. And that's really boring to write. Yoast, schema.org, doing it automatically, brilliant stuff. Look at this, we can see it's a website. We're on a website in a block, which is a web page and an FAQ page. And within that block, we have a question and an answer. Brilliant. Google can say, I'm at a website within a web page with a question and an answer. And it's very easy for Google to understand what the question is, what the answer is, and what the context is of both of those. And you look at this, extra bonus is part of. It tells me once again what the context is, what the parent is, what context we're in. Date modified, really important. I'm fresh, I'm up to date. I'm updating this regularly. Primary image of page, what we're seeing in the SERPs these days. More and more images, more and more videos. Google wants the images, he wants to show them to people because it's interesting. People want that visual quality. Here, immediately Google says, we have a question, we have an answer, and I have an image that I can show with it. And we all see more and more rich results within the SERPs. This is where it's coming from. Here's a very simple example that I wrote. This one took me 20 minutes. And what I like about this is you can see very clearly what I'm talking about. A corporation called Calicube, which is my company, it has a URL that we have identified, an address, and an aggregate rating, and this is the best part. Blocks. Schema markup is broken down into blocks. I've got a company with an address. That address is a block. Within that block, I have a country, which is a block. Google can work through this and understand not only where I am, but the relationships between all of these different elements, block by block by block by block. That is very, very, very powerful. So the conclusion, other than the fact that schema markup and blocks are the most powerful thing I have seen in a long time, is if we think in blocks, we can go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels very easily. 6 levels of blocks without even thinking about it. We're organizing our content all in the same manner so that Google can understand it easily, correctly, and with great confidence. Get into Schema. I know you guys know loads more about this than I do. I think Schema is really interesting, really powerful, but difficult. And getting it right is so hard, and I am so glad that you guys have sorted it out for me so I don't have to bother thinking about it anymore. WordPress natively thinks in blocks. Gutenberg natively thinks in blocks. Schema.org explains to Google, and Yoast is making it so easy for us. So I would say, thank you guys, and thank you.
I'm looking forward to discussing this method even further. But before we do, I have to explain John's special. We all know that John Hello and welcome back. Thank you very much, Jason, for giving us such a clear introduction into structured data. I'm looking forward to discussing this even further.
Brilliant.
But before we do, I have to explain Jono's special tasks. We all know that Jono, being very wise, has the annoying habit of dominating discussions with super long sentences that come out of his mouth slightly too fluently. And of course, he also talks about cats too much. So that's why we created a special rule for him today. During our discussion, we can be interrupted by Jono. If that happens, we'll immediately stop our conversation and go over to Jono. But he'll only get 3 chances to spread his structured data wisdom. Are you ready, Jono? Don't fall asleep.
Does this count?
No. For all of you watching, we'll end this webinar with a Q&A session, so don't hesitate to add your questions in the YouTube comments so we can answer them. We've already seen some of your questions about, does this all relate to Gutenberg? We're thinking of you. So my first question to you is, what are the most common misunderstandings with structured data, and what are people not getting? I'll start with you, Omar.
Well, I think that probably the biggest one would be that structured data is just for Google, or that structured data is sort of invented by Google, something like that. Well, in fact, I think that structured data is just a very logical sort of evolution for the web to go in. And it's all about structuring information. And it's all about making information relatable and interactive with each other. And I think that's always very good to understand before you start any discussion about structured data.
It's actually maintained, it's good to know, but Schema.org is maintained by the large search engines. So it's Bing, Google, Yandex, and Yahoo, I think.
Yeah.
And the same people that do XML sitemaps together.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good point. It's also not just for them. We talk to Pinterest regularly, who consume a lot of schema on a daily basis.
Okay.
And there's lots and lots of social networks like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important for all these machines because, as I said earlier on, it's their maternal language. It just makes digesting this information, which is terribly confused, very easy for them. For me, one misconception that hurts or makes me feel sad is that people think it's for developers, it's code.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not code. It's everything we have in our minds. It's just organized incredibly well. And it forces us. And when I started writing schema markup, first thing I noticed, it took me lots of time. And not because I didn't understand how to write it, but because my mind wasn't very clear. I wasn't organizing things in my mind. I was making imaginative leaps from one idea to another. And when I put it in schema markup, I go, no, it doesn't make sense. And that forced me, like Gutenberg, forces me to think in a much more structured manner. And that, as I said, the web is incredibly confused because as human beings, we find that very difficult.
But so in an ideal world, should you have to think about it?
In an ideal world, no. We're not living in an ideal world. But what I was using your language readability analysis yesterday after our conversation and found that I failed one test every single time. And it was what are they called? Joining words?
Yeah, the transition words.
Yeah, transition words. I never use them. All of the other ones, I'm getting my green. And I immediately looked and I said, why aren't I using them? And the answer is because I think that the two are so obviously linked to each other, I don't need them, but in fact I do.
Yeah. Well, it's also, it happens a lot that people don't use them when they don't actually make paragraphs, but they make loose sentences.
Oh, he's found me out.
But yeah, no, so in my opinion, and as you were presenting, I was thinking we've named those wrong because we call them Yoast structured data blocks, but it doesn't matter that they're structured data blocks.
Brilliant. No. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
They're a how-to and they're an FAQ, and we plan to do more, and they just should be giving you the means to put that on your page, and you shouldn't even need to think about the schema underneath that. Because to be honest, having written most of the code that outputs our schema, I don't think most people should spend time doing that. As you said, that piece of schema that you showed cost you half an hour to create. If you need to do that for every page that you're writing, then you've just added on another hour for every page that you need to write on your website, and that's a lot of time.
It's a lot of time, and it's really boring.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at what you guys have done, I mean, I'm going, oh, thanks. And I think you're 100% right. I know what's behind it, but I don't need to know what's behind it. I need to just do my FAQ or my
how-to, yeah.
Thank you, how-to.
Or recipe or whatever. There we go. Jono.
Number one. So you're absolutely right. I think it's also worth thinking that this is just the beginning, that there are many, many more bits of schema coming, and it's still an ongoing work in progress, and it's an open source project, so everyone can chip in and have an opinion. There is a whole section of the schema.org website where they discuss things which are coming soon, and we already have recipes and jobs and libraries and
different sizes of tires for cars. All of these are things that can be marked up. There are so many thousands more coming. It's impractical for individual people and authors and webmasters to be writing their own schema code. We do need to make it absolutely invisible, and people shouldn't have to think about this. But this is very much the backbone of the web, and it enables all the cool stuff that we're thinking about. But it shouldn't be the responsibility of individual people to write and manage that code. That's crazy.
Yeah, so it is a developer thing. It should be a developer thing. Developers should be thinking about how to make that translation.
Yeah, but that's you guys.
Yeah.
I'm writing my FAQ. Sorry, I'm writing my question, my answer. Click on a button. You guys create the code. I don't need to see it. I don't need to know about it.
No.
And it isn't a developer's thing because it is just taking what I've written in and structuring it. Sorry.
Yeah, that's the point. I totally agree with you. But it's about making the things on our pages or the things in our information transferable, basically. And these things have sort of implicit structure. Like when we look at a recipe together, we see something with a heading and a list and some instructions, and somehow we know it's a recipe, right? But how do we know this? I mean, we rely on context to recognize that list as a list of ingredients. And we rely on context to recognize those steps as sort of recipe instructions, how to prepare the meal. But there's nothing about that text that says it's a recipe except for the context that we rely on. And so if we want to make it clear what this thing is, we need to somehow describe it, and we need to somehow structure it, make it identifiable, and that's where structured data comes in.
It's funny that you mentioned recipe and you actually already used the word how to and how you in your explanation of what a recipe is. Because in schema, a recipe is basically a how-to with more specific labels. So everything becomes more specific as you dive deeper. But that is one of the things that I think is really interesting, but also really scary in schema, because I don't know where this ends. How deep do we go? And what do we mark up and what do we not mark up? There's this fine barrier there of what do we need to, and it's interesting to go through and have a look and see, like, okay, so where does this end and how much schema can we put on a page?
It doesn't end, I think.
Well, in terms of man hours or woman hours or person hours, the law of diminishing returns certainly comes into play. I start writing my schema, and after a while, the returns that's giving me in terms of being able to, or communicating all this granular detail, it's not worth my time.
Right.
And something like Yoast, which is doing it for me automatically, immediately makes that law of diminishing returns less important to me, and I can spend more time I can spend more time thinking about what I'm saying, my content.
Yeah, which you should be.
Yeah.
I mean, I very much think of us as the tool that should get out of your way and let you build your thing and only tell you when you're doing it wrong.
But I do wonder about one thing. Like, do you think that if more websites start outputting more structured data, that it becomes increasingly more valuable to do more? Because I think that the more things we start outputting on the web, the more meaning we have to make interactive with each other, the more bridges we need to connect those things up. I think this will be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and in 10 years, we'll have much more structured data than we have today, and the value of that is just exponential.
Yeah, I was talking to Jonah earlier on, so that he doesn't have to interrupt here.
Thanks.
About how quickly we get used to this kind of technology. And my example was flights and hotels. I book a flight or a hotel, the email comes into Gmail, it goes into my calendar straight away, and when it doesn't, I'm really upset. Or I forget about it and I miss my flight.
When it doesn't, and when it's from a large vendor, I get really annoyed. So Disney, get your act together, because every time I book Disneyland or Disney World, it does not show up in my Google Calendar. It's 2019. Fix that.
But what is really important to say is that the reason it goes from Gmail straight into the calendar is because of the structured data behind it.
So
that allows Google, as you rightly said, to hook these two things together incredibly easy. And it's not just Google, and that's what you said right at the beginning. We can interact with each other. Brilliant stuff.
It's a lot of that, and it's very interesting to see how these things tie together. I do want to cut back quickly to the first question that we already saw on YouTube. It's only for Gutenberg. Well, no. All those blocks exist everywhere, and the large majority of the blocks that Yoast outputs, it outputs everywhere. The specific structured data blocks that he showed only work with Gutenberg right now. We might actually port those back to the classic editor because y'all don't move to Gutenberg fast enough. Yeah, we're not sure about that yet. So for now, those blocks are only available. Those specific blocks are only available on Gutenberg, but everything else works for basically every website.
Yeah.
The funny thing to me is that this is going to be part of the CMS war in a way.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because this is something that every CMS will have to solve. And every CMS will have to become better and better at doing this and getting a proper interface for doing this. And I don't know whether all of them can do that and can face up to that challenge. So there's going to be so many custom implementations. We have already seen in the last few years so many custom schema implementations on top of expensive CMSs. And I hope that open source in this regard actually can also be working collaboratively on all this stuff and making this stuff better. Right before the show, we had WP Munich announcing that they want to release a plugin which ties event calendar to Yoast SEO's schema API so that it outputs all the schema correctly in with our schema system.
Fantastic.
Which is awesome. That's open source. That's what we want to see.
And that's what you told me yesterday, is that people with other plugin builders can hook into your API and leverage the system you've built to get schema markup across all these.
We've seen that from quite a few plugins already. It's really powerful because that means that we can all work together and make that schema thing better. So yeah, that's where the power of open source can help us beat other CMSs very easily.
And that's really interesting. I mean, like you said, CMSs will have to become IMSs, like information management systems, or block management systems, basically, where all these different blocks can be managed together and tied together in different ways. And it's just so awesome to see that the WordPress community comes together to build a tool like Gutenberg, which is only in its first stages, and there's many awesome things going up. And then we as Yoast are able to build a schema API and leverage that block system, and then other tools start integrating with those blocks and with the Yoast Schema API, and all of a sudden we have sort of an information management system that is super powerful, and it's just because we come together as an open source community and build all the tools.
Whilst keeping it useful.
Yeah.
And I think that's our biggest challenge as well, because all of those code examples you show, I'm both excited when I see them because I like working on schema. I'm also scared for normal users to have to know about this stuff. Should we, as I said earlier, we don't need that necessarily. At the same time, they probably do need some understanding of how everything ties together. So the question is, where does that end? And another question is, and I'm going to lay it to the two of you, is it in the end more beneficial for the website, or is it more beneficial for Google itself as a corporate entity?
That's framing it a little bit.
That is framing it more than a little bit.
You're talking about, is it beneficial for the website, or like you could still, like, it would be a different question, is it beneficial for the business? Because I think if you ask if it's beneficial for the website, then probably not, because all of that information that was hidden in plain sight in our old HTML documents is now sort of explicitly crawlable and can be reused outside of the context of that website. So what you see with rich snippets within Google, people don't have to go to the website anymore to get a certain answer. But then again, that is also a huge improvement for the end user, because the end user can get his answer without having to go through all of the marketing crap from the user perspective when it's absolutely not what I'm looking for. I think the only thing that's really important is that if more and more information is consumed through rich snippets, then it should be always clear. There should be a really strong focus on branding, because that information needs to somehow reflect back on the brand, And if it doesn't, or if Google makes that harder, then we have a really big problem.
And if I can jump in on
Go
exactly
right
that
ahead.
point, because that was going to be what I was going to say, something along those lines, is this idea of saying, okay, we're getting less traffic.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean to say that we're losing clients, because if that traffic comes to us because they're ready to buy and they don't come previously in that user-buyer journey, that's fine, as long as the same number of people are buying. And I'm beginning to get kind of excited about the idea is our website is a representation of our brand. You said very rightly brand, and we don't think websites, we need to think brand. It's a representation that I control. And once I get somebody there, I can start giving them the sales pitch. But the SERPs in Google are now a representation of my brand. And if I can make sure that those feature snippets have my branding on it, I get this on-SERP SEO that kind of is this vague idea that people are coming into. Is it Google's responsibility? Somewhere along the line, they're putting those little icons into the mobile results, but it's also my responsibility as a brand to make sure my brand is mentioned in those rich elements that come up in Google. But then also websites, forums, Pinterest, Amazon, they're all representations of my brand, and I need to, as a brand, need to start thinking about all these different representations and making sure that I influence or control them as much as I possibly can to get my brand message across so that when that person does end up on my website, they're ready to buy. And that traffic becomes more valuable.
I think there's a third answer, which is that when all of these many websites have all of this rich structured data and all of this markup that describes what they are and what they do and their products and their information, other services might spring into existence. What Google does very well at the moment is crawls the web, extracts the information, and understands it. If that information is readily available, it's much easier to crawl, it's much easier to understand and to store and manage. You could very easily build competitors to Google in smaller niches that did slightly different things in a way that would be very hard today. So I think it's great for Google, it's great for users, but it also enables new things that we can't really easily imagine at the moment because Google has such a lead on this kind of consumption. But new things will happen that will change that game a bit. It'll be really exciting to see what.
Well, I like that idea.
Yeah, you don't need the kind of AI capabilities that Google has to understand what's on the page anymore. So maybe you can get sort of some of that head start back.
Well, we'll get to the questions in a bit, but I also think that this is an interesting thing to think about and discuss. For just over a decade, we've been talking in the SEO industry about how Google was getting better at comprehending a page. And I think the conclusion is, after all of that they actually were pretty bad at it and that they've now given up and started using Schema to do lots better. So that's the interesting bit here, that it was almost undoable for Google to do this without Schema. And I think that realizing that that Schema solves that and makes it a lot easier to make a good search engine is really, well, it makes for an enticing future. I'm going to wrap up this discussion because otherwise we'll be talking for ages and we will never get to our Q&A. So, what have we learned so far about structured data? As Jason was explaining in the beginning, the web is evolving. We're thinking much more about blocks of content and how they relate to each other. Schema helps us define those blocks and their relations. It's an exciting time, and we're looking forward to doing more work in it. So thank you so much to John and Omar for being here, and to Jason, of course, an extra big special thanks. We're going to go to questions, and then we're going to see whether we can actually answer them.
Ooh.
John is joining us. Please do sit down.
Thank you very much. Hello.
Did I notice you're only asking 2 questions?
Yeah,
I've got a
only
spare.
used 2. That was weird, wasn't it? So you try and give him 3 things, and then he only interrupts you twice.
Sorry.
I have a lot of questions here, and I'm going to just pick randomly. So
That could be interesting.
that is going to be interesting. The funny thing is, I'm browsing through this, and I already see 3 different page builders mentioned. So that's going to be a topic. I'm going to go with the first one because it mentions our good friends Elemental, which Omar and I visited last year, 2 years ago already.
No, it's about a year ago.
A little over a year in Israel. Does Yoast add schema blocks in Elementor? Can you take that one?
Well, actually, I don't think we do. But what I know is that Elementor is one of the few page builders out there that has some level of interoperability with blocks. So it should be possible to use the Yoast Gutenberg blocks within Elementor pages and still be able to use Elementor to build the rest of that page. So I think it should work together, but we don't add anything specifically for Elementor.
This question comes along for a couple of page builders here. I see Avada Fusion Builder being mentioned and DV. Do you think that this will make it harder to use a page builder, John?
I think it's a really interesting question. What is a page builder in a world where a page is constructed of blocks? And there's even before that, there's a question of what is a theme? And at the moment, WordPress has a really clear distinction of here is your theme, which is all of your layout and structure, and here is your content, and this bit is made of blocks. That's going to get very blurry. And I think there still will be a theme of sorts that maybe manages styling and colors and some decisions. And there will still be pages and content management, which might need some, what does this block do? Where does this one go? I think it's very unclear what these platforms become. I think hopefully some of them will consolidate a bit and they'll build on Gutenberg as a foundation rather than doing their own thing. And then hopefully for us, it should be pretty easy to make sure that our stuff is interoperable in the same way that it is with Elementor. But they will all need to work out what their future looks like in Gutenberg and beyond.
I like, sorry, what you just said about theme, design.
Yeah,
Blocks,
exactly.
content.
Yeah. Yes.
My ex-wife is a graphic designer, and the first thing she saw was that design is here, blocks and content are here. Think of them separately. They're not the same thing. And if you can separate and say your theme is just your design, and then you're just moving these blocks around and putting pretty colors behind them, brilliant.
Actually, it's a little bit sort of backwards that you have to be able to code to implement a design, right?
Yeah.
And when I buy a theme, I don't buy the code. I just want that design. So if that design can be expressed in just some kind of block configuration, great.
Yeah.
Like that would be amazing. I see much more potential actually for creativity and great designs in theme marketplaces, just because it became much easier to create a theme this way.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll see graphic designers coming back into fashion where they've gone completely out of fashion at the moment. And we'll have a more beautiful web because they can actually separate.
They can do their own thing.
Yeah,
yeah, great.
And we might end up with a beautiful web again.
Yeah.
Again, why did I say again? We never had one.
We've had a decade of everything looking like a bootstrap template where you get the big banner across the top because it became hard to separate design and content. But now maybe we fixed that.
This is a nice one for you, John.
Ooh, 2 in a row.
Can a homepage have 20+ location in the schema, or does Google not like that?
So there's a lot of confusion around where you should put which bits of schema, and rightly so, it's poorly documented. Parts of Google have different opinions and have said different things. Strictly, yes, your homepage can represent a business which has 20 locations, and in which case you should be outputting all 20 of those as part of the business. If you have 100, that's a lot of code and it's quite heavy and you might need to bend the rules a little bit. It's hard. This is a really good example of one of the kinds of difficult questions that we're spending a lot of time trying to answer, and there isn't a good answer. So behind the scenes, we try and do all the thinking of if this scenario, but not this scenario, and if it's red but not green, then we should put 6 on. And we're making hundreds of these decisions, and it's all a little bit give and take. But yes, you can, you probably shouldn't, unless you maybe should, it depends.
Spoken like a true consultant.
It depends.
Or we could say spoken like a true Jono.
Well, to be honest, the best giveaway that you're talking to a consultant is when they start answering their questions by saying it depends. So there's a lot of things to know there. There's a lot of specific things. I see a couple of questions here about e-commerce. And how does this all relate? And do we need a block builder to do e-commerce? Ooh. Well, no, you don't. If you use WooCommerce and you use our plugin and everything that we have for it, I actually think that we do the schema quite well. Yeah. But there's very specific things there that people are asking for already that I'm going like, yeah, that's what Google wants and that's what we want, but we don't know how to do it yet. So how do we get the GTIN, which is a global
It's the identifier, global identifier for a product that makes it unique.
Yeah.
They're really hard to find. I mean, the clients I've got, I'm saying, what is it? And they go, well, I don't know. Because the people themselves, the clients themselves.
The funny thing is, why does Google want a GTIN on every product?
Because if you have a product schema that doesn't have it, it throws a warning and says you ought to add this.
And we know why. Because it wants to compare you to other sites having that same product.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is one of those cases where you have to wonder, is it beneficial for you to add that GTIN?
With the assumption that at some point when they've got 100 of those, they can build their own product comparison engine in the search results and people never visit your sites. But this is what you were saying. That changes the story from how do I get people to click on my website and buy my thing here to how do I represent my brand in the search results. And it might be your best SEO strategy is to make your product cheaper, not to try and get more people to click on your results. It's a bit woolly, but
yeah, and we're starting to see kind of big blocks on the knowledge panel side with comparisons that are directly in Google. So it's saying you can actually start making your choice here. I don't think we're at the stage or near the stage where you can actually make that full choice, but you're already getting a good way in with comparing, and it's Google who's making the decision as to what's compared to what.
So in the long run, can you actually compete?
I think that's a really, really tough question because you also have the question of when somebody searches for a product and decides to buy it, they then end up going to Amazon and it's the cheapest who wins. So you end up in a paradigm shift, and it is problematic. But I think we come back to brand, and you sell because you've got a unique selling point that nobody else can compete on, and it's not necessarily price. And if you're always going for the lowest price, maybe you will always lose, but maybe your client service is better. Maybe you have nicer wrapping paper, I don't know, quicker shipping. And I think as a brand, you need to think, what is my unique selling point? I need to communicate that on every single representation of my brand.
Including all of your schema.
So another question here, does Yoast SEO Premium enable unique schema for internal pages? For example, the FAQ needs a schema for FAQ only on that page. The answer is simple, right? Yes, we do.
We do for FAQ pages. There are some others like checkout page, cart page we do in WooCommerce. There's some which are a bit vague, like About Us page. We don't necessarily know that your About Us page is an About Us page. We're looking at ways that we can make that a bit easier to understand. That will come later. Alternatively, you can do it yourself. We've got an API, 5 lines or so of code. You can copy and paste our examples.
I saw that you mentioned search results page as well. Yeah. We do that automatically. So if you have a search results page within your site, then it becomes a search results page type. Yeah. There's a lot of these things that we already do. And yes, it's unique for every URL on your site. We generate a lot of code. And we try to do it as fast as we can. A good question here, how does Yoast avoid conflicts with schema inserted by some other source than Yoast? Which is something that happens. John, how should people be worried about this?
So it's not the end of the world. Google will parse and identify it. It will flag that you maybe have 2 web pages. I think in most of those cases, our markup is going to be significantly more robust and more correct, and you hope that Google reads that one rather than the other. Certainly, much of the markup that's already out there is riddled with errors anyway, so having a good one and a broken one isn't going to hurt you too much. I would check. You can use the Google Structured Data Testing tool, which you can find if you Google it, and run through and spot errors. What you can do is ask the plugin and theme developers who are outputting the not quite right schema to follow our guidelines and integrate with our structure, which we truly believe is the best way to do it. It's all open source, it's all documented. They can change the way their output works to get a best of both result.
And to bounce back on something you said earlier on, which is some people, I mean, there are lots of things that are not clear about how you should be writing a schema.
There's a huge amount of opinion.
Yeah. Well, exactly. But then if you've got one central source, which is at the moment Yoast, and you say, okay, at least if we all agree to that, at least Google's got a pattern to follow.
Yep.
And I'm not saying you're imposing it, but wouldn't be a bad thing to say, this is a system, you're making lots of decisions so that I don't have to make them. And if we all follow that same rule, but we won't end up with that same problem of WC3 code, that it's completely all over the place. And maybe we will have some kind of standardized system. And I would love that, because it would make my life much easier, make Google's life much easier,
But it's also, you come into a problematic thing, which is funny, which it's already mentioned here in the questions as well. Someone asked, will there be a review schema added in an upcoming release of Yoast? Which is a good question. But the apparently reply to that in the comments was that people feel that when we add review schema, it'll become too easy to abuse, which is also something we think about a lot.
Yeah.
To be honest, that's not going to stop us from adding it.
So Google are very strong on spotting people who lie in their schema, and they penalize you. They remove your eligibility for those schema types. I've worked with brands recently who had review markup that said our brand has 10,000 five-star reviews, and you look at their Trustpilot and it says you've got 5,000 three-star reviews. You get a message in Search Console, they say, slap wrist, you're not allowed this, and they take it away. They're really fast on that.
I think what's strong about our implementation and what also probably make Google favor ours over others is that we try our best to relate all the different bits and pieces on the page to each other by putting them all in the same graph.
Yeah.
And what you see in most implementations is that this plugin outputs that data blob, and that plugin outputs that data blob, and it's unclear how those things are related.
Yeah.
So at least within Yoast, it's clear how those things are related. All the relations are there, and it will be easier for Google to understand how the things on the page relate to each other, and that is already some sort of a signal of some sort of reliability, which will make it easier to understand.
Brilliant. And another thing is, we talk a lot about trust these days, and Google's looking at trust-based knowledge, and I think, personally speaking, that's a really good thing. We're moving away from links in PageRank to trust. Does Google trust you? And if it does trust you, you can have your own review system because you're a trustworthy source. If you're, my site couldn't have a review system because I'm not trusted enough in e-commerce for widgets. And so that idea of building your trust, and then I think you can build a review system that you then own and represent. And the idea that then Google has said, okay, this is a trusted source, their reviews are therefore trustworthy. Trustpilot are trustworthy in inverted commas because they've got that reputation.
Yeah. And imagine lying on your review schema to get some star results at the cost of destroying that trust. That's going to do more than a slap on the wrist. That means that 2, 5, 10 years from now, you don't rank, you don't appear in other things. Google fundamentally doesn't trust you, your brand, your website. You completely derail your brand for the foreseeable future. It's not worth trying to cheat.
Yeah, and the whole thing about we were talking earlier on, the brand, your website is a representation of your brand and not the other way around. And the idea that you can just build a new website with a new domain and run away and hide and start again is now completely false.
Yep.
Do you think there's a risk in this trust? Because let's say I have a small website, not doing a whole bunch of traffic, so you wouldn't expect a whole lot of reviews, but I have a very loyal customer base and I'm getting a lot of really good, really honest reviews. How will Google look at those reviews?
It's difficult, right? And we know that they're not great for that kind of false positive stuff, and they tend to hit people down first and then, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. But by that point, you've hurt people's mortgages and livelihoods and incomes. I think that's a real danger.
So the web needs to figure that out.
Well, it's also, Google's getting more and more data points about shops. So they might not see all that much traffic to your site, and they might not see all that much links to your site, but they might see a lot of people going to your store on Google Maps. So I would relate all those things, because with a lot of people have Android phones, and if you're looking in your Android phone in your location history, they can see exactly which shop you've been in.
Yep.
So they can correlate all these things if you tie them together.
Yeah, and they just got a patent awarded for regular visitors to physical shops through Android, and that's now possibly part of the local search ranking factors. Is they're saying if that client goes back again and again and again and again.
Well, it makes sense, right? If you have to
100%.
rank 3 bakeries in a local search, and you know that one of them gets 10 times as many visitors as the other 2.
Or even specifically repeat visitors.
No,
'cause that's
repeat
an
visitors.
indication of-
That's the-
Do you think, that's a thought I've had a couple of times, do you think structured data could bring offline back? Because
well, in a way, it ties the two together. I think Google is trying very hard, especially in e-commerce, to tie off and online together because they have to. And they're trying more and more to make a checkout in a physical store to be able to tie that into the search that you did before that. which it can if you did it on your mobile phone.
We were talking about this the other evening about how it will possibly bring back specialization in offline, whereas at the moment an offline store tends to be, we're a bit of a jack of all trades. I think it'd be really interesting that what Google want you to have and compete for is the best shoe shop that only sells red shoes.
Right.
And you mark that up in your schema, they compete offline, they get the repeat traffic. It's an interesting world it creates.
But I mean, the whole offline thing is a little bit off topic, but the whole offline thing is coming back into fashion. We've spent almost 20 years now going online, and it's this kind of isolated environment. And whether it's EAT, networking, getting relationships to get links, or repeat visitors in shops, selling.
All these SEO terms, I get. So
I'm sorry.
No, you're absolutely right for using them. It's just I get annoyed, not with you, but with our industry.
They're all proxies for trust.
Yeah.
All of it. Links, content, EAT, all of it is how trustworthy is your brand.
I should have just said that, shouldn't I? Yeah.
No, you said that. you did say that
It's
before.
funny, we have a question that I think is, a lot of people are asking, it ties back a bit to our previous show, is structured data a ranking factor?
Right.
Well, let's start with you. I have deep opinions.
Eligibility to get rich results in the search rankings, which you can't get unless you have that structured data. So maybe without it, I might have ranked third, but with it, I might still rank third, but also at the top of the page have a map and some information, etc. So yeah, the last thing we did was what is a ranking factor? It may mean that you get more search result space.
But if you get a rich snippet and everyone around you does not, so you get more clicks.
Yep.
At that point, those clicks become a real ranking factor. We've seen that enough of that to know that it's fairly true. Yeah. Isn't it? I mean, in some spaces like the recipe space, it's impossible to rank without structured data.
And that's going to become the norm. Like recipes at the moment are the exception, but jobs are not far off now. Local businesses, other areas, every type of business and service will eventually, you'll have to have this level of structured data, because if you don't, you'll be the one on the page who doesn't. And unless you've got a pretty picture and a star review and somebody's face and all the other bits, you're not going to get the click.
So someone is saying, this is great for IT guys, but what about the rest of us who want to get better results on our websites? Well, you're right. That is the problem. That is the problem that we're trying to fix by building this in such a way that you don't have to think about it. But at the same time, until we are there and everything is done, and that's honestly years away, this is something that you'll have to learn a bit of to be able to compete now.
And if I can come back to, is it a ranking factor? I'd like to say something really obnoxious and say, what is ranking?
Well, yeah.
And you've got this thing where the 10 blue links, we're traditionally thinking, I need to rank number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever it might be, 10 blue links. We take a choice and we click on it and it was pure text. Now you're saying every time a rich element, such as a featured snippet or images or videos, comes into play, a blue link disappears. It's a bit like the cat disappears every time you do a bullet point list. And so in fact, you're saying, I'm not ranking number 2 or number 3, but I do have the videos or I have the featured snippet. So I'm, in the presentation I did for Yoast Academy this afternoon that we recorded, is your structured data and blocks are the means by which Google can pull this content out of your site and put it in the results as these rich elements. And specifically structured data not only enriches the results, as you just mentioned, but it also creates the opportunity for some results such as recipes, and as you say, that's going to expand. So you're saying, in terms of ranking purely as the 10 blue links, no. In terms of getting on that page with your rich elements, which is what's now catching people's eye and what Google is looking to do, yes, in the sense that you're not going to get the places if you don't use blocks and you don't use schema markup and you don't structure your data on your content.
Yeah, basically, structured data blocks are the thing that make structured data what you see is what you get. It's you create the thing that other people will see with all the context that you have, but you do it in a structured way. So we derive the structured data from that, and the thing is there at the same time. So that is just, I think that's the big revolution of the block editor, and that's how we're gonna make it accessible to a non-technical audience.
Yeah, but does that mean do we have to go back through our old content and update it to use this new schema?
Ooh, interesting.
Yes, of course. Like anybody who runs a business that has support documentation, has
Cost information, or
tons of pages with frequently asked questions, with how-to steps, basically. Those things should
Some
all
of it
be...
you get for free just by running Yoast SEO, because we will already output schema on your old pages too.
Yeah.
But things like FAQs, how-tos, etc. Yeah, I tend to agree. You actually have to go in and...
Yeah, can you not look at it like a spring clean?
Yep.
I mean, once every 20 years, spring clean, that's quite reasonable.
Every 20 years?
Wow.
Well, my site's been going since 1998, so 21 years I'm doing a spring clean. But in fact, I installed Gutenberg on my site, and I thought I was quite organised, and immediately realised that I wasn't, and I was talking absolute rubbish.
I honestly think that this is hard, because if you're a normal website owner and you have a bakery, and you want to spend maybe 20 hours a year maximum on maintaining your website. So, because why would you spend more?
But if your competing bakery on the next street spends 40 hours or 100 hours, and they invest in all of this, and they move from just writing pages with 200 words to authoring and publishing content with structure and layout, and as you said, really thinking about how do I organize this, they'll win. And of course, you only want to spend 20 hours updating it, but you're not in a vacuum. You have competitors, and Google is picking the best one. Yeah. And you have to do that again and again and again, not every 20 years, but that's the only way you win.
But I mean, you could also say, I mean, not necessarily a very good analogy, but you know, why should I clean the toilets in my restaurant? Because if you're not maintaining it, it's boring, it's not interesting, it takes time. You need to do it. It's a basic fundamental of your business as a restaurant. You're having your website and making it right, having your Google My Business, making it right, optimizing it is a fundamental part of any business today. Ooh, that sounded pretty good, didn't it?
That did sound pretty
so.
good.
Yep.
Now, I see a few comments asking about Yoast SEO versus Premium and some other plugins. I want to highlight that all of the SEO stuff, the schema stuff that we talked about is actually in Yoast SEO free. It's not that we don't want to make money, although it sometimes seems like we don't, but all of this is in Yoast SEO free, and we currently have no difference in terms of schema implementation between free and premium. So just switch to Yoast SEO free, whatever other thing you're using for your schema, and use that. Now, it's come up a few times, I think, that Google Structured Data Markup Helper. Google is very good at making ridiculous tools with even more ridiculously long names. And I love them. Is that a helpful thing?
Helpful is an interesting word. So they have at least 2 tools, and 3 or 4 in some cases. The Structured Data Markup tool.
Yeah.
It's a blunt tool. So you feed it your URL, or you copy or paste your code in, and it says, this bit's fine, you have these errors. You had some screenshots of it, the bits of the blocks within blocks. It's useful for understanding, are there any glaring errors in this? It's not so useful for, is this good enough and is it right? It frequently complains and throws warnings for things which are optional.
But now you're talking about the Structured Data Markup Tester and not the Structured Data Markup Helper.
Oh, sorry.
The problem is, that is the
and
problem.
the rich snippet validator? Is the rich
no,
snippet
it's the rich snippet eligibility tester.
Yes.
Yeah.
Different teams, different outputs. They're all useful. Plug your URL in, look at what the errors are, apply some common sense. If it says your, what's the acronym for the unique product ID?
Oh, the GTIN.
It will say, your GTIN is missing, and it will panic you, and it'll be big red flashing text. Apply some common sense, and you can ignore that. Look for things you can improve. So it will say, this recipe really ought to have an image, in which case you can go, okay, I should give this an image, but ignore the nonsense.
But how do you know what Google deems important and what not?
You don't. They're really bad at labeling it, and it's such a shame, because it should be so easy. So this is something we're going to do. We're going to say, you've written this recipe, but it looks like you've not included an image. You should do this.
Well, once again, kind of making the decision so that we don't need to think about it. So whether the person who said, what about people who aren't developers, there's your answer.
Well,
and that's what you
part of our job.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. And you were talking about, I've completely forgotten. So I interrupted you for absolutely no good reason. I do apologize.
That's all good. The thing is, I have a ton more questions in the document here. It's literally almost 4 pages.
Wow.
Nice.
We're not going to go through those. Now, the good thing is we have this FAQ block on Yoast.com.
We can author all these with structured content. We can output the schema. They'll turn up in the search results.
We'll go through and answer them. I want to thank you all for watching and asking so many questions. It's absolutely awesome to see all this come in. Yeah. Thank you, John Omar, for being here. Thank you, Jason. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome presentation.
Yep.
That's it for today.
We are just blocks within blocks.
If you want to find out more about SEO, or more specifically, if you want to learn more about structured data, look at Yoast Academy. We have a structured data course there. We have a free SEO for beginners course that has wonderful stuff. We have loads of good stuff there. Check it out. Jason has recorded some stuff for it this afternoon. There's a load there. Go look at it if you want to learn more. With that, we're going to end this webinar. Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.